Have you ever noticed in the dark of the night, it's like something moves? Strange motions, strange sounds. You keep catching something out of the corner of your eye. What was that? In our world, we have a lot of stories about things that go bump in the night. And even scarier, we have stories about ghosts that come out in the day. But in a galaxy far, far away, they have two kinds of ghosts. You have the Sith apparitions, and you have the Force ghosts of the Jedi. And they have very distinct and different origins, but they kind of relate to some of the ideas deep in the heart of Druidry. So let's talk about Force ghosts and hauntings in Star Wars and in Druidry today, as we walk together down Creation's path. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan Druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name's Brian, and I'm a Christopagan Druid, and I'm your spooky guide this evening.
He's also a scruffy-looking nerf herder.
Yes, I am a scruffy-looking nerf herder.
Today, we're going to be continuing our series on the strange interplay and interconnection between the Star Wars galaxy far, far away and modern Druidry. Today, we're going to be talking about Force ghosts, Force apparition, the Star Warsian understanding of what happens after you die and how that relates and interrelates with various concepts in Druidry. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever the app is you're listening to us on. We do 5 original Christopagan and Druid episodes Monday through Friday, and you don't want to miss a thing because we have a lot of fun stuff coming up. All right, let's just jump into it. So in the previous episode, we discussed how the ideas of the cosmic force and the living force relate to the Druid concepts of the one life and no. And this kind of continues that line in that all life arises from the one life and upon death returns to it. But in Druidry, sometimes we run off and join the other crowd. Sometimes we come back for another run around, and sometimes, well, as Ganogan, a lot of other Druid teachers have put it, you get cast back into the cauldron of Anun to cook for a little bit to prepare you for another go around in life.
Yummy.
Soup's not done yet. Put it back on the fire, boys.
Hey, I've had times where I think the soup's done and those carrots are still way too hard. It happens.
It's gotta
kick the flame up a bit and let it go a little bit longer, or the potatoes are still crunchy. Oh, yeah.
It's never a pleasant thing.
No.
So Star Wars initially takes in Yoda's explanation of what happens when someone passes away, takes the first view of things, right? Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter, but also do not be sad for those who have become one with the Force. That in life, we arise out of the Force, and in death, we return back to it. This provided an issue into the mysticism, if you will, into the mythology of Star Wars, because we had already heard Obi-Wan's voice. We had already seen Obi-Wan's Force ghost by this point. And so, narratively, we have to explain, how does Obi-Wan come back when he just merged back into the Force? Can people just arise out and go back in? What's going on here? And this to me is where Druidry and Star Wars diverge really hardcore. So in the Clone Wars, we actually get the explanation to this mystery. And it's an interesting one.
Especially by the time we get to the Clone Wars, that mystery gets even more complicated in the Star Wars settings, because a lot of the books, which is now cast out as legends, put forward these manifestation of Sith that have passed away as an apparition that haunted and harassed and led even Jedi down dark.
The two,
I was just being one of the big ones.
Yeah, I was just about to say the two most notable being Frieden Nod, who resuscitates the Sith from extinction, because in the old Legends story, the Sith were actually wiped out. They were actually made extinct. What happened was there were some possessed artifacts that had the spirit of Frieden Nod in them that then inspired some people to basically restart the Sith order, and we get the second Sith order And then that leads to Exar Kun, who then, upon his death, does not stay dead, but ends up possessing a Jedi in the future, causing all kinds of issues. And yeah, we have a lot of stories like that were cast out from the new canon, but still persist in the minds of fans. Okay, if Exar Kun could somehow transcend death, and Obi-Wan, Yoda, and even Anakin Skywalker could transcend death, what does that mean? And so in the Clone Wars, we actually get a wonderful series of episodes where Yoda goes on a quest. He's sent on a quest by the ghost of Qui-Gon, tells him that he has learned the way to keep his consciousness in the Force, and Yoda needs to go and learn how to do this as well. And he sends Yoda out on this quest, and we learn a lot about the lore in these episodes. And they do relate to ideas still from that we see in Druidry and in both in Irish, Scottish, and Welsh mythology, but in very interesting ways. Yoda actually encounters the Force ghost of Darth Bane in this series. Darth Bane being the infamous Sith who created the rule of two, that there could only be two Sith at any one time, one to possess the power and the other to crave it. This is actually how the Sith went underground. We don't know the details of that really, because that story was covered in legends, but we're getting bits and pieces of it thrown back out. But he encounters the spirit, and the spirit is trying to tempt Yoda. And Yoda, at this point, points out that Bane has long since become one with the Force. And this is just that part of him, that fear, that control, that is just grasping on and refusing to let go. So it's not actually him. So how does this relate over to ideas that we find within Druidry and within the various Celtic lines of lore? We often believe that people have what is called a co-walker, often referred to as a fetch. I am not going to try to pronounce the Scottish Gaelic for it, because I understand that there are differences in pronunciation between Scottish Gaelic and Irish Gaeilge. I have been studying Irish Gaeilge, so I know I'm going to mispronounce this. I'm not going to try, but you can look it up online.
Don't worry, I'm going to laugh, but I'm also going to swiftly bow out, knowing my limitations.
But the co-walker is one of the other crowd that joins us in this life. They are one of the good people, one of the good neighbors that shares this life with us. They share in our memories, they share in our sensations, they basically share this life with us. And there are very interesting things that you can do with a co-walker practice, with a fetch practice, and it's not something to be entered into lightly. If this is something that you are interested in, Danu Forest in the book Wild Magic goes into this a little bit. So does Morgan Daimler in any of their fairy magic books. To touch on this a bit, the fetch is your co-walker. It is your doppelganger. It often looks like you, but it can look like an animal. It can look like any person. It is a shape-shifting spirit. I, from my own fetch practice, have seen similarities between a fetch and a familiar, but I can see how they are different entities, but I can see how uninitiated people who are familiar with both fetches and familiars would confuse your co-walker with the familiar. I can see how that distinction could be lost in somebody who doesn't know that there is a difference between the two. And it is often an omen of death in the lore. So when a person is nearing their death, their fetch will often appear to others to get their attention, to come to the person who is in distress in their final moments. It is said that if you meet your fetch at night, it is a sign that you will not make it to the morning. But if you meet your fetch in the morning, you can attain wisdom and great learning from it. This spirit tends to be what we think of most, what we encounter mostly when we are encountering a haunting. Fetches, in my experience, these co-walkers can become obsessed with a moment in a person's life. And upon the death of that person, they're not what we would call a residual haunting, a haunting that just repeats the same events over and over and over again, but they are much more an attachment to a place. So it is rare when you find a spirit that is wanting to own a specific house or property that is actually the spirit of the deceased person, and is very often the co-walker of that person who came to love this place, love this land. Remember, many of the other crowd do claim physical locations as their own. And that is the spirit that often is responsible for, no, this is my house. Why are you redecorating? Why are you doing this? And so in that kind of attachment phase, we see something very akin to what we see in the Sith. This is a spirit that is not actually the spirit of the deceased individual, but that is attached to a location, sometimes to an object, but often to a location that is resistant to change, often does not like new people living there because it is their house and requires a certain amount of care. These are also the spirits that very often exorcism doesn't work on because, and I hate to say this to all the people who think that you can't really exorcise any member of the other crowd. Exorcism really doesn't work on them. They're not demons as much as some folklore wants to make them into demons. So they actually have to be negotiated with or contracted out or make the location so inhospitable to them that they just leave. So if you've ever encountered stories of a haunting that they're like, we keep having the place blessed, we keep having people come in to usher the spirits to the other side, we keep bringing people in to exercise the place, but it just won't change it. Yeah, that's probably somebody's co-walker that has claimed that place as their own.
That's also why when some people go in and they help the haunting to move on, come to peace and at rest and move on, that tends to work on both cases, because if it's a coworker that just has this attack and coming to terms with and moving on to where what they should be doing next in their journey is very effective, because they'll choose to leave. They finally let go of that attachment and they're now going back to do what they're supposed to be doing, and the haunting ends.
This is also why some people can get an attachment from a haunted place. It's because something about you reminds them of the one that they were a coworker for before.
Yeah.
And so they have now decided to be your coworker as well. A lot of the conflict that can come is actually between your fetch and this uninvited welcome coworker who is trying to add themselves to the family, if you will, of spirits.
Not to mention the disruption to when they follow you back to your house, because sometimes new members added into a household of the other crowd can come into conflict with the other crowd that are already in your space and cause disharmony, a lot of disharmony. And yeah, it's not just the fetch. It could just be the whole place could be then thrown out of balance.
So it took me years before my co-walker revealed their name to me. And you'll notice that I have never said what that name is. Brian doesn't even know. I have been, one of the things, knowing their name was that I am not allowed to reveal their name. So I am allowed to know it. I am not allowed to say it. And that's part of these contracts that you have to be very careful when you're entering into this kind of work. Anytime you're working with the other crowd, you're always have to be mindful about the terms and conditions, because in working with the other crowd, terms and conditions always apply. We see that a lot in Star Wars with the way that spirits work and operate. Now, this is different from what Obi-Wan, Yoda, eventually Luke, what they are. Anakin, this is different from what they are. They are beings who have kept themselves together. Now, this is a very Star Warsy thing and does not have a direct correlation really in any faith, if you will.
I'd say maybe Buddhism might come closest, but
yeah, but no.
The whole point is, and there's the contractual agreement to come back and continue to help everyone else to move on, and not really. Yeah, it's also not like that.
One of the three Dharma seals in Buddhism is anatman, that there is no soul. There is no atman. We really don't have a good word for atman in English, because it's not really soul, it's not really spirit. It doesn't really, often this is translated to no self, because the actual teaching, the way it generally works out, is that there is no separate self, that every being is interconnected with and to all of creation. So everything is a part of this kind of seamless whole, and recognizing that is part of awakening. In the way that Star Wars tends to understand death is using the analogy of the wave in the ocean, that the ocean exists and the ocean is the force, and each individual is a wave that arises out of the ocean and eventually will merge back into the ocean. That people are more or less momentary blips. They're drops pulled out of the ocean that will then merge back into the ocean and become indistinct from it. And in Star Wars, an individual has to train to essentially hold themselves together, to not dissipate back into the wider ocean of the Force. This is the practice that we see Yoda learning through the Guardians of the Wills in the Clone Wars. And we are told in, I believe it's the certain point of view for Return of the Jedi, that upon Anakin's death, because he had actually done a lot of the work necessary, that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan actually came to Anakin when he died and helped him finish the training so that he could maintain his presence within the living Force. And that's how he appears at the end of Return of the Jedi, that they actually showed up at his moment of death and helped him to maintain his presence. Now, this has gotten muddied, as many things in Star Wars lore has, with the ending of The Rise of Skywalker, where we hear so many voices of the Jedi speaking. And Kanan Jarrus never did those studies, but we hear Kanan Jarrus's voice very clearly in that great cloud of voices of the Jedi that we hear. I don't think we're meant to take any of that literally, though. This is where it gets really tricksy in trying to interpret a film, is what is literal and what is not. And the reason for that is, if we're supposed to take it literally, then we need to assume that there were two Obi-Wans, because we hear both Alec Guinness's voice and we hear Ewan McGregor's voice in that great cloud of witness of the Jedi. And so I don't think we're meant to take all that literally.
From a Druidic perspective of that moment, I look at that more from the root of the ancestors, where it's just you're calling upon the ancestors that came before, you're hearing them speaking, but it's just drawing that inspiration, guidance, and strength from those that have come before you in that moment, rather than specific individual manifestations of those individuals.
If I were to try to interpret that moment as it would play out, like mythically, it's the argument there is Rey discovers that she's a Palpatine, and the Emperor is trying to say that lineage comes through blood. Mm-hmm. And she's really taking the stand of lineage comes from found family. And she is demonstrating that power of built community and found family in this moment where we're hearing the entire lineage of the Jedi speaking and encouraging and giving her strength to do what needs to be done. And so that's how I would interpret that.
Me too.
Because that's what fits the metaphor in there. And I know a lot of people are not willing yet to look at the metaphors of the sequel trilogy and to mine it for anything deeper, because especially Star Wars fandom has become very literal minded, which I find hilarious, because these are all fairy tales. George Lucas was very clear. These are fairy tales. They are meant to be metaphors. They're meant to be stories to dig into and look into what is being said that cannot be said, whether intentionally or unintentionally in the story. So yeah, that is something that we should do. Now, the way I would look at this from a context is, again, from an Irish perspective, when one dies, they go to Tech Dawn, to the House of Dawn, and here is where they figure out what is going to happen next. What are we going to do? Mainly because there are thousands of worlds in the other world. We have again Mel, and I'm going to stop.
Yeah, tomorrow,
because there are so many places. Yeah, there's so many places that you could go, and we also know that at least the continental Celts believed in reincarnation. This is one of the things that amazed the Romans about them, is that they were so willing to go out and fight because they truly believed and knew in their bones that they would come back. So losing this life wasn't considered a great loss for them. And several of the Roman writers comment about this belief in what they called the Pythagoras doctrine, which is this idea of palingenesis, that you can be born again. That's what palingenesis means, to be born again and have another life. They were astounded by that. But this is also where these become very vague, because there is a line that is hard to draw between ancestral spirits and the good neighbors. Not all of the good neighbors are ancestor spirits. In other words, people who have passed into the beyond. Some of them have always lived there and will always live there and never take a corporeal form. But some of them are people who lived before and decided to stay amongst the other crowd. And so this to me is the closest I can see as an analogy to what we see in Star Wars is this learning whether or not you want to essentially run around with the other crowd, which is what we would see Luke and Anakin and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Yoda doing, right? Staying a spirit within the other world, or dissolving into the living force, or as we would say, coming back into the world for another life. It's also important to remember that you did not necessarily live your life in chronological order.
Yeah, which is an interesting thought when you put that into the context of reincarnation then, where it's not necessarily that where you are now is the next journey from the series that came before. Technically, this could be your first, and many others happened before.
The chronology of the other world and our chronology don't match. And so
Yeah,
we have in the remnant record we have of the lore of the ancient pagan Irish, Welsh, and Scots, a couple different recountings of former lives. And they include things of, I was this, I will have been that, I was this, I will have been that. And they alternate from things that happened before the life of the person talking and things from the future. Because in coming back from the other world, sometimes you don't come back in the time after that life. Sometimes you come back before the life that you live. And so there is not this idea of time itself having a strict linear progression. We as humans, as embodied humans, experience life with a very hardened concept of past, present, and future. But on the other side, in the other world, that is not the case. So the joke of I should have been born a Roman, well, in this view of reincarnation, in your next life, you might be born as a Roman.
Which is really interesting because, like I said, a lot of my encounters of when people are talking about reincarnation, they still follow that very human chronological perspective. And I find it very refreshing that this, where time is no longer, it's outside that realm of time. So why should it or would it strictly follow time?
Exactly. So like there's no rhyme or reason for it to be that way. It is our prejudice as people who exist within space, as people who exist within this fabric that we don't even understand. Like it's hard for us to understand that time moves at a different rate at sea level than it does on the top of a mountain, or that it does at the space station, or that it does on the moon. That time moves at a different rate in all of these places because we don't have that frame of reference. And even worse, we can't have that frame of reference. We don't feel the difference of time passage differently in those places. The only way we know that is these very carefully calibrated clocks that fall out of sync with each other when they're placed in these different locations, that they're based on like atomic decay, right? Things that are not affected by location, but are affected by this relationship with space-time. And that really does baggle the mind. So the idea of understanding what is after this world is just beyond us.
Yeah. And just to emphasize the prejudice that exists, just when talking with somebody, refer to us as beings of the fourth dimension. And they will, odds are the other party is going to have some kind of knee-jerk reaction to that statement. It's quite possible that you as the listener just had a knee-jerk reaction to that statement, challenging it and questioning it as being, is that right or wrong? We're three-dimensional in time, and then that's space, but we also move through time, which is the fourth dimension. And so therefore, we're fourth dimensional beings, and we have so much prejudice regarding that. It's pretty crazy.
So this is an interesting one to try to ponder. And it's one that I personally would not spend too much time on, because all we are doing is contemplating what might be in the hereafter.
I like to think of it as a leisure activity. If you have some leisure time, enjoy. If you have fun with it, but yeah, do not make a hill out of it.
When I was training, one of the meditations that we were asked to do once we had contacted our guardian angel was to go into a state of deep meditation and to ask it to give us a glimpse of the afterlife. And I couldn't find good words for the experience that I had. The easiest would be that I was flying over a wooded valley with a river going through it and the warm sun around me. I have no concept of being a bird or a butterfly or an insect or a pterodactyl or a pteranodon or anything. I had no embodied experience in this state, just this pure sense of freedom that my brain interpreted as flying in this idyllic set. Does that mean that I'm right? Well, that's just what happened to me during meditation when I asked this question to my guardian angel, to my angelic guardian. But
Yeah.
and the point of that was to get us beyond questioning. Because what in having that experience, I'm here struggling just to put it into words. Just like my brain struggled to put it into a form that I could understand. And it's beyond me.
Yeah, because when it came out, was asked to describe, I was like, imagine existing in a moment of joy in multiple locations, in multiple places in time, all in one single moment of experience. And even that does not do justice in words for that. And that makes the brain kind of pop. And it was a great lesson on, that's leisure activity. Plus, also, doesn't really matter what's going on right now while I am bound in time and space.
And while we are bound in time and space, it is incumbent upon us to worry much more about what's happening here than there.
Yeah. Be mindful of the present force.
So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. These are just fun ways to poke and prod at the lore of Star Wars and see its connections to and differences from what we do in Druidry. This is going to be a fun series, and I hope you come along for it. There will be interruptions in it, so don't worry. It's not going to be all Star Wars all the time, but we're just, as you can see, there are a lot of topics in here that we wanted to discuss, and this gives us a good vehicle to do that. So may the fourth be with you, and may everything go well during the revenge of the sixth. Oh, man. I would love to know your thoughts on all of this, whether it's Star Wars related or Druidry related or anything else. You can leave a comment if you're listening to us on YouTube, Spotify, or CreationsPaths.com right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they do not let us know, so we won't know that you did it. So you can leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic, and then head over to CreationsPaths.com, click on chat, and then you can leave us a message. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars you can send our way, we offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CU Dorset on both. Or you can support us using the Cash App hashtag CreationsPaths. Thank you to everybody who does that. It really means the world to us. It helps keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on our table. If you don't have any money right now, or if you're not sure that we're the kind of people that you want to give your hard-earned treasure to, that is perfectly all right and understandable. But if we've ever said anything that's helped you out or you think would help others, please share it with them. That helps us out more than you could possibly know. And as we are heading out today, Mananan, great guide and guardian of the great sea beyond, who ferries people from island to island and guards over the waters in between, Lord of storms and shelterer of those who are lost. Help us to find our way as we seek knowledge about our past and future lives, and help us to live well in this life with strength, honor, and truth. Amen.
Amen.